This is Future Headline News, where tomorrow's headlines become today's news.
Now that the United States has embarked on its latest new military intervention in Libya, I would love to be able to show you the current president's Oval Office address on the subject, but there isn't one. President Obama did make a public statement on Saturday afternoon that we had started that military intervention in Libya, but he did so from the confines of a convention center in Brazil. 8 years to the day that George W. Bush stared unsteadily into the camera and announced the Iraq invasion, President Obama announced his own military intervention, but he pointedly declined the opportunity to do that in a way that U.S. presidents usually do. President Obama taking all sorts of criticism from the right over the past few days for not canceling his trade visit to Latin America as a result of this military action. And George W. Bush ran in 2004 for re-election. The George W. Bush that ran for office in 2000 promised the country a humble America, a humble foreign policy, a bend-over backward bias against U.S. military intervention anywhere in the world. Lots of candidates for president promised that. A candidate named Barack Obama promised that. The difference with Mr. Obama as president is that he appears to be walking more of that walk, as well as talking that talk. Mr. Obama not making an Oval Office address to the nation. Mr. Obama repeatedly stressing the limited nature of U.S. involvement, promising there will be no ground troops in Libya, no matter what, leaving the overall question of an intervention until a UN Security Council resolution could be passed on the subject, and then actually following the UN Security Council's decision, the White House overtly acknowledging and making widely known that it sees France and Britain and Arab countries as in the lead here. The U.S. waiting until there was a clear international consensus before doing anything on our own and letting other nations make this more their war than our war. This is what President Obama promised as a candidate that he would do. It is frankly what most presidential candidates have promised as candidates that they would do. But the fact that he's actually doing it as president is freaking out all quarters of the political world that really kind of liked the interventionist, chest-thumping, triumphalist stuff. Well, I'm a big believer in Occam's razor, right? That the simplest explanation is probably best, and if there is an explanation that's being proffered that doesn't make sense, discard it and look to the simple explanation instead. Right. And we've had a lot of explanations for why we went to Iraq, but none of them have ever really made sense. I mean, ties to Al-Qaeda, there was never really any evidence of that. That was disproved. Weapons of mass destruction, no. Saddam, a bad man? Definitely. Obviously not why we went. Corruption in the oil for food program, things that Saddam did before the first Gulf War. All of these things have been proffered as explanations. None of them have really made sense. And no matter what new retroactively applicable explanations for why we invaded the White House and war supporters have come up with, there's still been no credible explanation for why we went. Especially one that would explain not only why we went, but why it's so important that we don't leave now.
Exactly.
Why we must stay. I mean, if you believe that we went because Saddam was a bad man, what does having American troops there for 100 years now do with that?
Well, remember those stories that he thought he was immortal. Maybe they think he's going to jump out of the ground and take back the oil fields.
We're patrolling the tomb, just in case. Yeah. I mean, what actually does make sense, the actual simple explanation that has been staring us in the face since before the beginning, since a guy had to quit Halliburton in order to become vice president, is that they want Iraq to be an oil colony. I mean, it's a very 19th century idea, but it's their natural resources, it's our markets, it's our profits. It's an old idea, but it's always been what's been staring us in the face.
We have seen this point go from being the ridiculous tin hat paranoid explanation of the far left to the Bush administration rationale. Well, imagine if Al-Qaeda got a hold of all the oil, what would it'd be $4 a gallon, wouldn't it? In the words of the vice president. Yeah. Does it at some point, do they just pull all the walls down? Does this become John McCain's rationale for the war? Is he going to run on, we have to get the oil companies back in there because that's when we can bring the price of gas down?
Because we need a colony. Yeah. We need to go back.
We need the oil.
Well, it was the first week of May. Just last month, and you and I talked about this. John McCain at a town hall event in Colorado today. I went back to the transcript and pulled this out. My friends, I will have an energy policy that we will be talking about which will eliminate our dependence on oil from the Middle East, that will then prevent us from having ever to send our young men and women into conflict again. in the Middle East. And remember, he dialed that back and he first said, oh, I was talking about the first Gulf War. That was the war for oil, not the second one. And then he dialed that back again and said, no, I didn't mean either of those. It was obviously about weapons of mass destruction. But maybe that was a Freudian slip, or maybe they are getting around to the idea that they'll say this was a war for oil and we need another.
So what happens in the event of an Obama victory in November to Iraq's oil? What sort of position does he have to take on it?
Well, I think if you don't want to be seen as a colonial power, you stop acting like one.
Yeah, that'd help.
And so you get the Americans out of the oil ministry, which is, still American advisors in the Iraqi oil ministry now. And honestly, you get the foreign occupying army off the streets of Iraq so that that country and its people have a choice and a chance at some point in the future of having a government that is seen as legitimate, as opposed to the occupied government, which we ensure that they're seen as long as our military is there.
Rachel Maddow of Air America and MSNBC, when we're fortunate.